So, what has Excelsior's domain been picking up from eBay? Let's have a look. So, little reminder here of the first Death's Head figure I ever picked up, which was difficult to get. Ironically, I ended up seeing him at lots of toy fairs after the fact, of course, as is often the way. But this is the Marvel Infinite series Death's Head. And I've done a video on him before. He is the second iteration of Death's Head from the British comics that introduced him. And this is not the first version of him that we saw in the Transformers comics, because in those comics he had a sort of a green armour layout, whereas when he was rebuilt in the future, I think it was 8162, he was given this sort of blue and gold uniform instead. And he was, otherwise he was generally speaking, he was sort of upgraded as into the bargain, but he was basically the same character that he had been. He was still essentially a mechanoid, a robot, not a cyborg or anything like that. And this is a relatively small figure of him as figure sizes go. You know, we're not talking sort of NECA scale here at all. So you sort of, for display purposes, it's a nice figure. I'm using my new camera here, so I'm just hoping that the tracking will kind of hold out for you. But as you can see, he looks good. I mean, he's a really good sort of representation of that new armor scheme. He's got an axe, he's got a shield, which he normally wears on his back. He's got his mace there. So you know, it's got a good level of accessories in there. You can see Marvel's Death's Head. Now, Death's Head is not a sort of a massive mainstream Marvel Universe player, but he is a Marvel Universe character. There's no two ways about it. But he's never had a Marvel Legends figure up until quite recently. Now, if I shove this chap back, you can see the difference in scale there is not insignificant. I mean, now I think this is a San Diego Comic-Con release of Death's Head on the right there. So as you can see, he's much bigger. It's a Hasbro release. I suspect this the smaller one was also Hasbro. Yes, he was. In fact, that's quite a nice. Just show you the back of the box there is quite nice as well. Don't know if you'll be able to read that, but it just gives a bit of sort of blurb on him and some other characters that you can pick up there as well. But this guy, I haven't had him out of the box, so this is going to be an unboxing. His box is very loose and wobbly, but this chap is a much bigger figure by far. I think it was Ed who put me onto this guy as a sort of a potential pickup, because he knew that they were bringing him out, and he is a much larger figure. But when you look across between the two of them, as I have been doing, the details are actually very similar, and I kind of wonder to what extent they used the original mold for the smaller version to do the larger version. So I think what I might well do is do a little bit of sort of a cross compare for you, just to see exactly what the differences really are between the two of them, because I don't think they're going to be that massive at the end of the day. It's just a question of scaling, basically. The box for this one is significantly different in the sense that it's got this Death's Head logo, which I remember very much from the comics, and you know, a little bit more sort of comics-based art, whereas the other one is really sort of focused on the actual figure itself rather than the comic art that it derives from. So as you can see there, you've got a bit of a sort of a power puissance stark pudge, whatever those mean, readout for him. I'm not even sure what that's supposed to indicate, other than that it's reminiscent perhaps of a Transformers tech spec, possibly a little bit. And it's saying there that his first appearance was in the Dragon's Claws, number 5. But that's not the case. He was definitely in the Transformers UK comics before that. And Dragon's Claws is another very obscure Marvel UK series, which I very much love, because it was one of the ones that came out at exactly the right time for my interest in comics and Transformers and everything like that. So it was an American-sized comic, but it was a British Marvel imprint. So it was a bit of an oddity, I suppose, in those days, in that there weren't many of those around. But Marvel UK was categorically a thing, and that's why we get characters like Deathhead coming from the sort of the Marvel UK stable of characters. So I'm just going to change my setup a little bit, and we'll have a little bit of a closer look at him on an unboxing basis. Okay, so box size wise, we've got it's about 9 inches tall, which I guess means he's probably going to be maybe around the 8 inches mark by the time his packaging comes off, and it's about 2.5 inches deep. So it's a fairly chunky box, but it's interesting in the sense that this isn't like, I wouldn't think this is a standard Marvel Legends box. So I'm not really sure what their thinking was with this, whether or not they thought it was going to be a sort of a fairly sort of limited release kind of thing, or what they were going for with this as a concept. But let's get him out and have a proper look at him. I don't think he's been out of his box before, so it is actually sealed. Which will probably require me to do a bit of cutting work here just to get him out effectively. Okay, so let's have a look at what we're getting in our box. It'll be interesting to see what he's got accessories wise, actually, because I don't know if they've given him exactly the same loadout as his smaller version has or not. Well, we're about to find out. Okay, there we go. So I suspect that is actually very similar to the smaller version. So if you have a look at that, you can see that his shield's in the same place. He's got extra hands though, interestingly. So he's got a few more articulation options. Let's have a look what he's got. Let's free him and have a full-on look at exactly what he's actually got available to him. Now, I must admit, I don't think that I have. It's interesting how it separates. I'm not sure that I have any other Marvel Legends figures to compare this with. I've tended to get sort of Batman figures to this point, so obviously that doesn't have the crossover element. But let's fetch him out. He's got a very vinyl sort of cape. That's not cloth. That's the plastic cape, which is interesting because it's actually going through. It's going through the plastic. So that's kind of odd. I wonder how you're supposed to safely remove him when that is actually going through the plastic. He's actually proving pretty resilient, yes, to being unboxed. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else actually holding him in, because oddly I don't think there is, and yet it's he doesn't really want to seem to come free of his packaging, which I suppose is good because it means he's not going to start moving around in his box randomly. But I would quite like to be able to get him out. So there we are. I've managed to extract him, but I actually had to squash his cape down to get him out. Because there's a lot of, I mean, although it's sort of vinyl, it does flex, so it's not sort of like a solid cape. And you might think that the mice have been at it, but actually, I think that's just comic accurate because you know, he does get shot at quite a lot. so it's not surprising that his cape sometimes comes off the worse for wear as a result. So I'm going to have a little sort of play around with him now and just see what his articulation is like. Let me just zoom out now, just you can just sort of see what sort of articulation he's got on him. I mean, I like the way that it stands. If you put his legs together, I find that he does have a sort of tendency to fall over a touch, admittedly. So I think you'd have to be a little bit careful about how you posed him. But I mean, he hasn't got massive. I mean, of course, he might just be very, very stiff because he's fresh out of the box. But his knees aren't moving massively there. He's got foot movement, as you can see there. But he hasn't. His knees don't seem to want to do a lot at all. I don't know if it's just that side. But these knee joints are not playing ball at all. It's rather odd. So I'm not quite sure what's going on with that there. I mean, they must work, but perhaps they just need a little bit of loosening up first or something, because they definitely don't seem to want to do a lot at the moment. They may just be very stiff. So one of Death's heads, I mean, this is a slight irony, I suppose, in the way that the toys have come along in the time since he was first released back in the 80s, because this sort of, the idea of having interchangeable hands is actually something that Death's Head did in the comics anyway, because being a mechanoid, he often surprised his enemies by virtue of simply removing his existing hands and just swapping them out for various weapon systems instead. So sometimes he just sort of release his hands, which ironically enough I can't seem to make him do. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what's going on there. I mean, I have two hands here. Those are alternative hands for him, but unfortunately, at the moment I haven't actually figured out how to remove his current hands, so that's a little bit of an issue. But I'll have to have a little look at that as a concept and just see if I can mess around with that a little bit. Well, it did take a fair bit of doing. I guess the thing is, fundamentally, this is a very new figure, so of course he is quite stiff, but I did eventually manage to remove his hands, and I'm just chuckling to myself, because if you did ever see him like this in real life, if you lose it, he won't actually then be able to switch any of his... Basically, he could never get in this state. He'd always need one hand to be able to swap out his appendages and his weapon system, so you'd never actually ever see him sporting two weapon systems at the same time. But he does have a range of missile and mace available to him, and he also has his trusty axe here, and his shield. Now, his shield, generally speaking, is on his back. I think it's partly to protect him from getting shot in his back, but that is definitely a sort of a comics thing, and often you'd see his weapons coming out from behind it. And in fact, I think they've allowed for that because there are various notches there into which you could place his various weapon systems. So I think that's actually what they've gone for there. So you can actually make it quite comic book accurate by virtue of just popping his accessories into his shield. And then now this will be interesting to see what they've done here. Does his so his cape starts below where the shield would go in, which makes perfect sense. So you can still peg the shield in there quite happily. So that makes him very, very comic book accurate. So I think that's a very, very clever thing to do, because in the comics, you know, he's invariably, you can see that he's got his weapons on his back because they poke up to the side of his head. I have got the joints moving a little bit on his knees. They just need a little bit of gentle persuasion to sort of, you know, make a start, basically. But yeah, I mean, I do definitely prefer this one in terms of size, as you know, it's much easier to manipulate him. He's got slightly more accessories than the smaller one, but I do want to get them out together because, you know, I think, look at him, isn't he pretty? I mean, he's such a niche character, I know, because if you're not into your if you've not been exposed to the UK version of Transformers and everything else, then you probably wouldn't necessarily recognise him. He has had some American comic appearances, but they have been quite limited. So I don't really know how well he's known outside the UK as a character. But one of the things I liked about him is that Furman gave him his own backstory, and he also got a lot of Jeff Senior art. So they're both favourites of mine in terms of comic books. So I really did enjoy the fact that he was getting a lot of sort of airtime by himself, because he got his own 10-book run, and then he started then he got sort of guest appearances with people like She-Hulk and Iron Man. So he has been around the block a little bit. It's just that he's not. He turned up in the Sword series as well, so it's not like he gets totally ignored, but he's not rolled out overly often. Let's put it that way. So I'm going to get the little guy out of the box, and I do tend to leave him in the box simply because the box is so wobbly. But let's just have a look at exactly the extent of the differences between these two, because as I say, I haven't really got the little guy out of the box that much either. An immediate difference is that he hasn't got the shield element in quite the same way as the big guy here. So let's just have a look at how they compare. I mean, obviously they are radically different scales, so in that sense there isn't really a comparison. But he has his little mace there, and he does have a battle axe, which is, as I say, it's not identical actually. It isn't identically. There aren't the same notches in it that there are with the larger one. I'm not sure if I can get that to focus in for you, but you can see obviously it's about half the scale that he is. In fact, I might measure him just to see. Now, interestingly, they've done exactly the same thing with the small one as they did with the big ones. They've made it. You've got to push his cape through the back of the plastic to actually get the figure out. So here we have the two of them together, and as you can see, we're talking about sort of half the height, I suspect. But let me just do a quick check on that theory. So it's a funny scale actually. So the smaller Death's Head is 5 inches, and I would say that the larger is about 7.5. So I don't know how that really sort of pans out in terms of normal action figure scales when all is said and done. But I'm looking at the two of them together, and let me just have a look at sort of. They're not identical. They're definitely not the same mold as such, because the damage on the axe, the damage on the sort of the shield armor elements here are not the same. These sort of bullet impressions aren't in quite the same places. So although they're both Hasbro, they do seem to have gone with a slightly different sort of mold. So this guy's horns are slightly sort of more pronounced than this guy's are, for example. So it's kind of the larger one doesn't. I mean, they are both unmistakably Death's Head. There's you can't argue with that as a concept at all. There's no mistaking them as both being Death's Head, but there is definitely a difference in approaches here. So, for example, the smaller Death's Head, the blue colouring on his armour is different, and his shield doesn't fit in on a single peg like it does on the larger version. It just sort of kind of grips 2 gaps in his back, so I found it a little bit more fiddly to put in, and his weapons don't stay in his shield quite as convincingly either. The articulation looks fine, but he doesn't have things like spare hands because he's not a big enough scale figure to accommodate that. He doesn't have the missile, he does have the mace, and then there is a shield on his back, but the belt detail, if you notice, is also a little bit different. On the larger version, there's red detailing on the belt, on the individual circles that come off the buckle element, but that's not present on the smaller Death's Head. So, and in fact, the gauntlets are quite different as well. He's got sort of much narrower wrist gauntlets, whereas he's got much wider gauntlets to take up about half his arm. So you just wonder if they did a sort of maybe they borrowed someone else's arms, because I mean he's got kind of a bit slightly Colossus-esque arms. So I wonder if they sort of reused that for the original Death's Head, but they tried harder with the bigger one perhaps. So I mean, if you are a fan of Death's Head, either of these are both really good figures at the end of the day. Let me just give you one thing I didn't do at the start was have a look at the date, and I may not even be able to read the dates, of course. But I'm just wondering when they actually produced this, the larger Death's Head, and indeed the smaller one, actually, for that matter. I do think the smaller one is much older. So, yes, I mean, this is bang up to date. Well, I'll say it's bang up to date because it's now last year, but the larger one is 2024. So it is pretty new. So let me just see if I can see on the box of the smaller Death's Head when he was brought out. I think 2013. So he's copyright Marvel 2013. So there's been 11 years between them, which seems to be about the right sort of gappage for Death's Heads coming out, it would seem. So yeah, I mean, when you compare them with the comic book version of him here, I mean, obviously, that's a sort of very stylized version of it. It depends how each artist does it, but I do think that the larger Death's Head figures definitely got better gauntlets. But again, I think perhaps even then they've sort of taken slight liberties in terms of how they've reproduced him, because this sort of the yellowing on the gauntlet arm. I'm just gonna have a quick look here. There are some good images of him in this graphic novel. That's not a bad one, actually. So you can see there he does have yellow on his gauntlets there, and the sort of the clasp detail and stuff is there, as is the belt detail. So they have done a nice job of picking up on a lot of that detail. But the bigger one is definitely, I would say, more comic accurate than the smaller one is, which surprises me, because I wouldn't have called that just looking at them. But there's definitely something about the arms on the smaller one that aren't reproducing him quite as well as they might have done. But and I have to hand it to the big one. The way he can actually swap his weapons out on his hands is very Death's Head. You can't redo Death's Head properly without allowing him to swap out his weapons like that. And of course, these days, the toy approach to swapping out and giving you alternate hands just lends itself to Death's Head's modus operandi, basically, of being able to swap out his weapons, as I've mentioned. So, all in all, I do prefer the larger one. There's a vinyl cape on this one again here, and again I had to squeeze that just to get him out of his packaging, because he just wouldn't come out otherwise. So no idea how they managed to package them in the first place like that, but obviously they did. So yeah, so if you had the choice, I mean, obviously the larger one is going to be more expensive, but although that having been said, that might be the far easier one to find. I do find that when I go to toy fairs, having just bought these things, because I immediately see them, and I did see in one of Gareth's videos that there was the big version was available just to pick up at Doncaster, ironically enough. So I just thought I'd show you those two alongside each other, because I think it's a nice thing to see. Just in terms of comparison, what difference 11 years makes, and the different approach that's been taken to this larger scale version of him. And I mean, I think the larger one for display purposes is really, really nice. That's just a really good good figure to my mind. But let me know in the comments what you thought. Do like and subscribe as ever, and I'll see you for the next one. Cheers for now.